Hello, my name is Gaurav, and this is Jacob. We're editors-in-chief of the Harvard Kennedy School Student Policy Review. We're honored today to be joined by Mr. Ken Burns, America's foremost documentarian. Mr. Burns' work spans the length and breadth of American history and culture, from the Civil War to jazz to baseball and beyond. His most recent series covers the American Revolution, and we're very honored to have him here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Burns.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'll jump right in. Another hat that I wear here is I'm a teaching fellow for Fred Logevall. A lot of what his class is about is applied history and the way that it can be used by policymakers. So I was curious, first and foremost, in the work that you've done on leaders, their staff, and people around them, if you think there are patterns in how they've used history, and in addition to that, how you think they see themselves in history and how you would grade their performance, what they could do.
Well, I don't know how they see themselves in history, but what is really clear is that the most effective leaders that we have had in our politics and public policy from the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th century have all been extraordinary students of history. They've been well-versed in what took on. They knew the tides that had brought things to this moment, and they were anticipating in really sometimes profound and sometimes moving ways where things were going to go. And there's something extraordinarily empathetic and humble, as well as sort of dedicated, persevering, severe at times, but all of it is based on a really deep understanding of history. So George Washington, 18th, Lincoln, 19th, FDR, 20th, and they have a sense of where they are in time, and that doesn't come from anything but a strong historical thing. Harry Truman once said the only thing that's really new is the history you don't know. We always presume it's all ahead of us. It's actually behind us. And I've given a lot of commencements sort of telling them, whatever you do, don't say, your future lies ahead of you. I think your future lies behind you, I've said, because it comes from a digestion of history and its valuable lessons. And it's really the best teacher that you could possibly have for any kind of subject.
Makes a lot of sense. Do you think that there are ways to select for that in leadership, or do you think there are conditions that bring about those kind of leaders?
I think there's probably less a chance to select. I think certain conditions deliver certain people. It's so interesting that the person you'd least expect to win the Republican nomination for president in 1860 is the guy from Illinois. And all the other people think that they can do a better job of him, and he very smartly brings almost all of them into his cabinet. And he understood that the interplay of their ambitions with their knowledge and him would do something, advantageous. It's a brilliant masterstroke of manipulation in the best sense of the word. And I think, I'm not sure anybody else could have gotten us through those 4 years than Abraham Lincoln and the sacrifices that he made.
It's fascinating. We also talk a lot about just so stories and the idea that, everything is obvious with the benefit of hindsight.
So not Rudyard Kipling's Just So Stories.
It's although that's also great.
On the great green, gray, greasy banks of the Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees.
Right. But just the idea that they are not, in hindsight it's obvious, but with ex ante it tends not to be obvious at all.
David McCullough used to say that in the past, there's no foreseeable future. And that for me, good history is thinking it might not turn out the way you know it did. So I've had many people come up to me about our Civil War series and say, I went into the last episode, the 9th episode, and I really hoped the gun would jam at Ford's Theater this time. And that is like the highest possible compliment. And that there's a moment in our American Revolution where the French come in at the end of episode 4, but at the end of episode 5, the British take Charleston. It's a giant death blow, and it's like they capture an entire American army and surrender. It's a horrific, humiliating thing. And Washington, the last word of episode 5 is Washington's going, I just don't know how we're going to do it. Like, I know how it turns out. I've been working on this. I know exactly what episode 6 is all about, and it gets better. And we win. But I remember a screening, when we were editing it, and I went, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I felt it in the moment, and that's hugely important, that they don't know how it's going to how it's going to turn out. He does not know he's George Washington. He does not know he'll be on a dollar bill, that there'll be a long spiky monument to him in the national capital, which will be called Washington, and that on the other side of the continent, remember Continental Congress, Continental Army, they wanted to go there. They had an empire in mind, regardless of the 300 nations that lived in that place, that there'd be a state with his name on it, and that in every other state, a county or a town has his name. He had no idea about that. And so the great arrogance of the present is that we impose what we know on the past and think, therefore, that we're smarter than them because we're survived and they haven't. They're much more smarter than us, and that the thing is, for us to be smart is to use their examples in the best possible way to create the things that we want in the present and in the future.
Right.
I think in the same way that we obscure that counterfactual history, thinking things could have gone one way or could have gone another, and not being able to appreciate those alternatives. I think often we also obscure or sometimes fail to appreciate those divisions or hesitations, the disillusionment that existed even in episodes of American history where we conceive of America as very united. I think the American Revolution is kind of a tantamount example of this, but World War II and other events as well. I'm curious, what lessons have you taken from those times about how Americans balanced, their patriotism or their desire for unity with their opposition to the direction of the country, and what lessons that might carry for us today?
Well, I think you take the lessons that human nature never changes. So in World War II, it's estimated that 1/4 of every financial transaction was in the black market.
Yeah.
What do we hear? Oh, scrap drives, rubber drives, gasoline rationing, we're going to have a victory garden, everything is going to be, we're all in this together. So 1/4 of the population is not in this together. They're trying to get around the rules. They're trying to break the rules. If we had a robust IRS, we would find out exactly how many tax cheaters there are and probably have been. The revolution is way more divided than we were. It's a civil war. A huge part of the population is loyalist, and in some areas it's a dominant population, and your life is in danger if you're a patriot, and other neighborhoods in which it's vice versa. And there are terrorist organizations of patriots killing loyalists and vice versa. So I think that you first of all have to sort of disenthrall yourself, as Lincoln would say, from the sort of fantasy versions of the past we have, the superficial ones. And the counterfactual are also distractions, because while you want to make sure that you understand the nature of contingency, that it could have gone off that way, that we'll always say, well, what if the South won the Civil War? What if this happened, and what if that happened? And what happens is that allows you to destabilize your own sense of what actually did happen, and then to be invested. And now we have all these rabbit holes where people go down absolutely sure that up is down and the earth is flat, and this was faked and the men never landed on the moon, it was a studio in Houston, and and you get a kind of, it's exactly what autocrats want, which is a superstitious and uneducated populace distracted by conspiracies, and not citizens pursuing happiness, which to the founders was lifelong learning, which would then make you virtuous enough to earn this huge responsibility of citizenship. Right. And that's at the heart of policy, is what is the responsibility of a citizen to each other? Like, we have ideas and these vague notions of freedom, but there's personal freedom, what I want, and collective freedom, what we need, and that sometimes they're at odds with one another, or at least it's a Venn diagram with very little overlap. And so you have these, sturdy libertarians who, once they've made their fortune, are certain that everything should be, get your own garbage collection, get your own water, and they can do it. But for most people, that's not a realistic thing, and we have to join together and figure out, with policy, how we're going to do this.
On that point, I'm curious, was there anything you learned in your study of the loyalists in the revolution or the isolationists in the world wars, about how they were eventually reconciled with the rest of the country or folded in or mended in some way that you think could prove instructive for us now?
Well, I'm not sure they ever are. The isolationists have reasserted themselves until a couple of weeks ago. I mean, that's one of the great, sleights of hand I've ever seen in my life. The oligarchs who controlled the South and therefore the United States government leading up to the Civil War brutally reimposed exactly what they had, except in law, the slavery that they've done, and we still know that people of color have a much more difficult time getting everything done, and people want to now forget that and take down the evidence of that. I think that I think that's
it's a tough thing to do.
The thing is, the loyalists teach you that maybe you might not have been a patriot. The presumption is, with a superficial, gallant mythology of the revolution, we're all patriots against them across the ocean, forgetting that it's a civil war, and that the British constitutional monarchy was probably the best form of government up to that time among the Western, what we call the European community, and that your prosperity, your property, your life expectancy, your literacy, whatever it is comes from that. And why would you change that for something that's completely untested and seems to be leaning towards something that, God forbid, would be democratic, meaning the rule of the mob? One Anglican preacher in Boston is turning to another and saying, after watching a gigantic demonstration, and said, what would you rather be ruled? One tyrant 3,000 miles away or 3,000 tyrants not a mile away? And that's a really good question that I don't think people are willing to say, what would I have been? Which is what a good history is going to do, is going to make you make that question, who would I have been? So I wouldn't even pair isolationists with loyalists. There are just phenomena in a moment. We know the isolationist movement begins to splinter when Charles Lindbergh, who is the voice of America First, gives a speech in Des Moines which is so blatantly anti-Semitic that all of a sudden the house of cards come down. It couldn't happen today because, we've been there, it's okay, and we let it all pass. I don't know what breaks the fever of these sorts of neuroses and stuff. And then, of course, the Japanese attack, and then Hitler's great favor to FDR of declaring war a few days later, basically breaks the back of the isolationist movement for a while. And we've had a kind of bipartisan, up until recently, sort of sense of what our view in the world is, which has been sort of smashed like a hammer to a piggy bank.
Fascinating. You talked about the past couple of weeks, so this is particularly topical, but I've long thought that the limits of American power and leaders' inability to heed those at times can lead to certain incidents, Vietnam, Iraq, potentially Iran. When you look back and when leaders overestimate their own hand, what do you see as the reasons that happens, and why is it so hard to learn that historical lesson, even in scenarios where the leader does have a good grasp of history?
Well, I'm not sure that the leaders did have a good grasp. Eisenhower did, and Kennedy inherited 700 military advisors when Kennedy took office. Johnson inherited 1,000 days later 17,000, and it would be, a year and a half after a landslide victory that Johnson committed. I think there's hubris. I think there's sense of American exceptionalism that doesn't question things. The great irony is that on September 2nd, 1945, which is the day the Japanese surrendered in Tokyo Bay on the USS Missouri unconditionally, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnamese independence in Ba Dinh Square in Hanoi, and he quoted Thomas Jefferson in that thing, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed. I mean, it's really amazing. And standing next to him are OSS officers who saved his life earlier in January, we think, of 45, when they were looking for anti-Japanese allies in Southeast Asia. And then within a month, the State Department was saying, get away from him, he's a commie. The Soviets and the Chinese communists felt that he was a nationalist and were very suspicious of him. And then there's he beats the French, and there's a Geneva Convention, and the whole idea is 2 years later there'd be an election, and if we just left it and not gone with the dictator, No Ding Diem in South Vietnam, and had an election, he would have won, Ho Chi Minh would have won overwhelmingly, and there'd be 6 or 7 million human beings still alive, and their offspring. So, we make huge mistakes. I mean, we have in the Mexican War an attempt where this is a war of choice. We're just going to take Texas because we want to expand slavery. That's it, and it's a complicated dynamic that we have to sort of acknowledge is part of what it is.
I want to. Yeah.
One
yeah.
more.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Do you understand?
Great, final question. Given that the Kennedy School is a place that tries to educate future policymakers, I'll ask this in 2 parts. What is one historical lesson that you wish young policymakers could take with them, either specific to the U.S. case or thematic? And then second, we also have a really large international student population. What would you want them to know about U.S. history or Americanness in your view that would be important for them in their governments or their private sectors?
I think that we're a relatively young country, but we're the oldest democracy on earth. We have, as Lincoln said, we are the last best hope of Earth. There's a part of it that has developed into a sense of exceptionalism that has been betrayed us here and there. My sense is that, and this covers both parts of your question, which is that if you are exceptional, then you have to work at it. Tom Brady, who is considered the best quarterback of all time, didn't win a Super Bowl, and he goes, okay, now I can just get fat and do whatever I want and not work out anymore. In fact, he kind of doubled and tripled down on it. And I think that what Americans do, the biggest mistake they do, and it extends from ordinary citizens to policymakers and leaders, is that they assume that we've arrived, and democracy is an active thing, and so it's constantly to be worked on. And if you are the best country, you have to be constantly improving yourself in a way, and that acknowledges your mistakes, not blinds that you don't take down the plaques to unfortunate, sad things because you want everybody to be happy about it. That's one-way ticket to mediocrity.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Burns, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.